Comfort is the enemy of growth because it convinces us that staying where we are is safer than stepping into the unknown, yet nothing extraordinary ever grows from a place of ease. When we cling to safety, routines, and predictability, we unknowingly build walls around our potential, protecting ourselves from discomfort, but also shielding ourselves from opportunity. For true transformation only begins when we are willing to leave the security of what we know and venture into the unfamiliar where mistakes are inevitable. Challenges are constant, and vulnerability becomes our daily companion, but it is in those exact conditions that strength, creativity, and resilience are forged. The people who grow, the ones who evolve into their fullest selves, are not those who avoided discomfort, but those who embraced it, who walked into the storm instead of waiting for it to pass. In doing so, discovered abilities and courage they didn't know they had, because growth is not born from repetition of the easy, but from the deliberate choice to lean into the hard. Comfort whispers that tomorrow will always be there, that waiting is safer, but in truth, waiting robs us of time and possibility, because while we sit in the familiar, the world keeps moving, opportunities pass, and our spirit slowly dulls under the weight of unchallenged living, while discomfort, though it stings and shakes us, keeps us alive, awake, and expanding. We grow not by being protected, but by being stretched, by taking risks that test our limits, by saying yes when fear tries to hold us back, by daring to fail and daring to rise again, because every time we step outside our comfort zone, we redefine what we are capable of, and every time we resist the urge to play it safe, we give ourselves permission to reach higher, go further, and live fuller. Comfort tells us the story of survival, but growth writes the story of becoming. And if we want lives that are not only lived but deeply experienced, then we must be willing to trade the shallow security of comfort for the uncertain, messy, beautiful process of transformation, knowing that while the familiar may feel safe, it is only in the unfamiliar that we discover who we truly are and what we are truly meant for. Discomfort is a compass because it points us directly toward the areas of life where growth, change, and fulfillment are waiting, even though everything inside us wants to turn away from it. We avoid the hard conversation because it makes us anxious, yet that very conversation could repair a broken relationship or open the door to deeper trust. We avoid the new challenge because it feels overwhelming, yet within that challenge lies the chance to discover strength we didn't know we had. And we avoid taking the risk because failure terrifies us, yet on the other side of that risk is the possibility of living a life that feels more aligned with who we truly are. Discomfort is not punishment, it is guidance. It is life nudging us toward what matters most. Because if something didn't matter, it wouldn't stir that unease in us. But because it does matter, it unsettles us and asks for our attention, reminding us that avoiding it will only prolong the ache. When we see discomfort not as a signal to stop, but as a sign to lean in, our perspective shifts. We begin to recognize that unease is evidence that we are standing at the edge of possibility, that our fear and resistance are not roadblocks but invitations, that the places where we feel most vulnerable are the exact places where transformation is ready to unfold. The truth is, the path we want most will rarely feel easy or certain at the beginning. It will feel awkward, messy, and full of doubt, but that is the nature of every worthwhile pursuit, and the discomfort that rises in those moments is not a warning that we are in the wrong place. It is proof that we are in the right one, that we are stepping out of the old and into the new, and though our instinct may be to retreat back into comfort, doing so would mean turning away from the very thing our heart is calling us toward. Every dream worth chasing, every relationship worth nurturing, every skill worth mastering, and every version of ourselves worth becoming will require us to walk through discomfort. And while it may feel heavy and unfamiliar, it is not there to stop us. It is there to guide us, to show us exactly where our deepest desires intersect with our greatest fears. Because in learning to move through that space, we discover not only what we want most, but who we are becoming in the process. Risk is the currency of fulfillment because every meaningful pursuit in life demands that we step away from the illusion of certainty and place something of ourselves on the line for the possibility of something greater. And while most people cling to what feels safe, predictable, and guaranteed. The truth is that safety rarely leads to a life that feels alive. It leads to a life that feels contained, and fulfillment cannot be found within walls built to keep out uncertainty. It is only discovered when we choose to trade the comfort of knowing for the adventure of becoming. The people who truly experience deep satisfaction and meaning are not necessarily the most talented or the most fortunate. They are simply the ones who are willing to risk failure, rejection, or loss in exchange for the possibility of growth, love, or success. And though risk often feels terrifying, it is also the doorway through which every great experience enters our lives, because there is no joy without vulnerability, no achievement without sacrifice, no transformation without uncertainty. The 1% understand this truth and live by it. They know that certainty is a cage, and though stepping into risk means stepping into the unknown, it is the only path that leads to the extraordinary, because what lies on the other side of risk is not just the possibility of external success, but the inner fulfillment of knowing you had the courage to try, that you refused to live a life dictated by fear, and that you chose expansion over limitation. And even when risk does not lead to the outcome we imagined, it still pays us back in lessons, resilience, and strength, shaping us into people capable of carrying bigger dreams, because fulfillment is never about the guarantee of results, but about the willingness to chase them, to dare, to stretch, to put ourselves on the line for what matters. Those unwilling to risk remain stuck in the cycle of what is known, and while that may feel stable, it eventually turns into stagnation. But those who are willing to risk discover that even the act of choosing possibility brings with it a sense of freedom and purpose, for to risk is to live fully, to engage with life not as a passive observer but as an active participant willing to be changed by it. And it is that willingness to let go of certainty in exchange for possibility that separates the life of quiet resignation from the life of deep fulfillment. Courage means standing apart, because the path to anything meaningful often begins in solitude, where you must make choices that others are unwilling to make. And in those choices, you discover the strength to walk alone before anyone else dares to follow. It is easy to move with the crowd, to take comfort in blending in, but real courage requires stepping into the unknown when the world offers no applause and no validation, only the quiet weight of your own conviction. And while others may watch with skepticism, doubt, or even criticism, it is in those very moments that you forge resilience to keep going despite the silence or resistance around you. Doing what others won't often feels lonely, not because you are wrong, but because you are moving ahead of where most people are willing to go. And this separation, though painful at times, is also where transformation is born. For the greatest leaders, innovators, and dreamers were once individuals who dared to act before the crowd believed, who trusted their vision enough to endure the loneliness of being misunderstood, and in time their courage lit a path for others to walk. But in the beginning, courage doesn't look like glory. It looks like small, unseen decisions to persist when giving up would be easier, to hold on to faith when doubt presses heavy, to act with integrity even when compromise seems more convenient, and to listen to the whisper within even when the noise around you tells you to stop. And while fear insists that standing apart means standing abandoned, courage teaches you that solitude is not emptiness but preparation, a refining ground where you learn who you are and what truly matters to you. Because when you no longer need the approval of the crowd, you gain the freedom to live by conviction rather than compliance. And though the walk may begin alone, your courage creates ripples, inspiring others not because you asked them to follow, but because your willingness to stand apart gave them permission to imagine that they could too. And slowly what once seemed impossible or foolish begins to take shape as possibility, all because someone was brave enough to be first. This is the paradox of courage. It requires walking alone at first, but in doing so, it builds the bridges that others eventually cross, reminding us that while the crowd may resist the unknown, it takes only one person standing apart to show that the unknown can be faced, and that act of standing, lonely though it may feel, is often the very beginning of collective transformation. Failure is a teacher, not a verdict, because every misstep, rejection, or collapse carries within it the raw material of growth. Yet most people see failure as a wall instead of a doorway, as an ending instead of an invitation to begin again with deeper wisdom. When the 99% encounter failure, they interpret it as proof that they are not enough, that the dream is out of reach, or that the risk was not worth taking. But the 1% recognize that failure is not a signal to quit, but a lesson wrapped in difficulty, offering insights that success could never teach, because success often confirms what we already know, while failure exposes what we must learn, where we must grow, and who we must become in order to rise to the next level. The truth is, no great achievement, no invention, no breakthrough, and no story of transformation has ever existed without countless failures paving the way. Because it is in falling short that we learn endurance, in rejection that we build resilience, and in stumbling that we discover the strength to stand taller than before. Failure humbles us, strips away illusions, and confronts us with our limits, yet in doing so, it also expands those limits. Because every lesson integrated from failure becomes a stepping stone that strengthens the foundation beneath us, and while the 99% retreat from that discomfort, choosing safety over risk, the 1% keep moving forward, using failure as feedback, as a compass pointing them closer to alignment with what works, what matters, and what lasts. The greatest tragedy is not in failing, but in refusing to see the gift failure offers, because when we treat it as a verdict, we sentence ourselves to smallness. But when we treat it as a teacher, we discover that every setback contains the seeds of reinvention, and with each attempt, each correction, each hard-won insight, we step closer to the fulfillment we desire. It is in this way that failure becomes not the opposite of success, but the very path to it, reminding us that endings are rarely final, that what feels like collapse can also be the ground from which new beginnings rise, and that the only true failure is refusing to try again. Discipline is freedom, because the small, consistent actions that seem insignificant in the moment are the very ones that compound into extraordinary results over time. And while most people dismiss these choices as too ordinary to matter, it is precisely their consistency that unlocks a life of possibility. Waking up early to train, choosing focus over distraction, practicing patience when others seek shortcuts. These are not glamorous decisions, but they build the habits that shape character, and character is what sustains success long after motivation fades. Discipline is often misunderstood as restriction, as though it cages us, but in truth it liberates us, because when we master the small actions we once resisted, we free ourselves from the chaos of impulse, from the weight of regret, and from the frustration of unmet potential, creating instead a rhythm that aligns our daily choices with our deepest values. The freedom born of discipline is not immediate. It grows quietly, almost invisibly, until one day the results appear undeniable, and what once required effort becomes second nature, giving us access to levels of strength, clarity, and fulfillment that randomness could never deliver. The 99% underestimate this because they seek quick wins. They look for hacks and shortcuts, but the 1% understand that real transformation is built brick by brick, day after day, in the ordinary decisions no one claps for, the moments when no one is watching, and discipline to keep showing up becomes the greatest act of self-respect. With discipline, we no longer live at the mercy of moods or circumstances. We rise above them, choosing action over excuse, consistency over chaos, and direction over drift. And in that choice lies true freedom. The freedom to create instead of wait, to lead instead of follow, to live intentionally instead of reactively. It is through discipline that dreams stop being distant and start becoming tangible, because every repetition, every sacrifice, every quiet moment of persistence carves a path toward mastery, and mastery opens doors that talent alone cannot. Discipline is not about denying ourselves joy. It is about cultivating the strength to delay gratification so that the joy we experience is deeper, more lasting, and rooted in achievement rather than chance. And when we commit to the small, steady actions that Others dismiss, we eventually arrive at a place they call impossible, not because we are extraordinary, but because we were willing to be consistent when they were not.